Hi friends, I don't have much time before I have to leave for work, but my name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People. I'm also Eric Strauss running for president, and today I'm going to be addressing a particular area of politics that I think is interesting and to provide my calculus on it. It's called left-right libertarian or left libertarian right. Who's correct on gun control? Let's look at the arguments. Left side arguments, leftists use these arguments. Number one, the scope of the problem requires action. Stats on gun violence, stats on gun accidents, stats on suicide. Number two, other countries prove gun laws work. They'll point to Europe. Europe has comparatively little violence and strict gun laws. Cops don't even need guns in England to be safe, they might say. Ours is the exception. Most first world countries tightly control access to guns. Number three, the Second Amendment is deprecated. Capacity to wage armed revolt no longer correlates with self-government. Guns are more powerful now, and it's not a limiting principle. Why not nukes? Aren't they arms? Those are the arguments for the left. Now let's go on to the right. Number one, guns are needed for self-defense. Number two, many crimes would be stopped if more law-abiding citizens carried guns. Number three, criminals who commit armed robbery obviously won't obey gun laws. Number four, guns don't kill people, people kill people, and knives would still exist. Number five, gun laws simply just don't work. We already have a bunch of them, and if we need more, then obviously the previous ones weren't working. Number six, our nation's sport hunters make up an important part of our national heritage. And the libertarian arguments. There is no justification for a state prohibiting the ownership of firearms as property. All illegal uses of firearms are already crimes, and there are many appropriate uses for guns, comprising 99% of actual usages. Number two, agents of the government who might enforce a gun law against a citizen are themselves citizens and thus ought to be subject to the same prohibition. There's no reason why the police should be anybody but representations of the citizenry. The fact that they are armed in this argument is indication that citizens must be able to have guns too. All right. Federal guns. Number three, federal gun laws violate the Constitution's Second Amendment. Judicial activism is bad because the Constitution constrains, and the Second Amendment is clear. Number four, transgression is a clear, bright line. Gun laws cross that line. So, in other words, if you take someone's gun away under legal authority, then you are transgressing against them unless it's a response to some sort of transgression. And number five, guns exist. No individual person ought to be afforded legitimacy to possess a gun to the exclusion of all equal others. If the average person isn't capable of owning a gun, then no one is. Otherwise, you're endorsing aristocracy. Okay, so those are libertarian arguments, right arguments, and left arguments. Which one is correct arguments is the question, though. Well, let's go quickly and analyze them. The first one here, scope of the problem requires action. This is an inherency question. Is there a problem with gun violence? Sure. What you establish that is not, it does not establish that you ought to do anything in particular. It just establishes that there's a problem. Sometimes we ought to do nothing. Number two, other countries prove gun laws work. Well, okay, fine, but they don't have 300 million guns already in the country, or however many there are in the United States. So that puts it in a different situation because are you going to take everyone's guns away? Or, granted, most gun laws don't try to get rid of all guns because of that very problem. But even if it's the case that gun laws work in other places, it doesn't mean that they're a good idea. There are other things at play besides simply number of gun deaths to be determined as to whether it has a good impact overall. So, in other words, it might reduce gun deaths substantially, but it may increase deaths in some other area. There have been studies on that suggest that's not the case. Probably gun laws do decrease total deaths by violence by a reasonably substantial amount. But again, though, that links to culture. It depends on the culture. Okay, so rights. This in the last one. The Second Amendment is deprecated. Capacity to wage armed revolt no longer correlates with self-government. It's true. Guns are more powerful now. True. Not a limiting principle. Why not nukes? True. But the Constitution is a limiting principle. So even though the Second Amendment isn't a limiting principle, the Constitution is. And thus we have to respect it because it's the Constitution and it constrains because that's what it does. So I'm going to say those left arguments don't really work. And the right arguments, guns are needed for self-defense. Probably not really. Most people aren't going to be in a situation where they have to shoot somebody in self-defense. Number two, many crimes would be stopped if more law-abiding citizens carried guns. No, probably not. Probably have more people flying off the handle and shooting guns because there's not a distinction between these groups called criminals and law-abiding citizens. Like, people sometimes commit crimes because they get in a bad place. Life's gone south real quick, who knows? Number three, criminals who commit armed robbery obviously won't obey gun laws. True. Guns don't kill people. People kill people, and knives still exist. True, but guns allow killing to be made easier and from a distance, and there's a lot of other factors in play besides simply. I mean, a gun is a lot more of a thing to wrestle with conceptually from a policy perspective than a knife. Number 5, gun laws don't work. We already have a bunch of them. Absolutely true. Number 6, our nation's sport hunters make up an important part of our national heritage. True, but not particularly impactful. Libertarian arguments. There is no justification for state prohibiting the ownership of firearms as property. Well, there is justification for state action in certain circumstances, and I think most people would agree we don't want the state to allow people to own nukes. All the illegal uses of firearms are crimes. True. There are appropriate uses for guns comprising 99% of all actual uses. That's true. That's a good point. That almost all the bullets fired in the United States are used for legal reasons, are fired for legal reasons. Almost none of the bullets that are fired in the United States are used to commit a crime. Okay, so agents of the government who might enforce a gun law against a citizen are themselves citizens and thus ought to be subject to the same prohibition. Well, yeah, I suppose, but there are reasons why a cop can access a cop car that a regular citizen can't. I don't get into the cop car because it's not my job to get into the cop car and drive around in it. True, it's a community resource, and I have as much citizen right to it as anybody else, but that's not my job. So you could easily enough argue that the same thing is true with a gun. If the cop goes to work, takes the gun, and it's government property, and then leaves it at work when he comes back home, then that wouldn't be a relevant argument. I don't think. I mean, the state does have property, and so if it were a property issue like that, it's a tricky argument. Federal gun laws violate the Constitution's Second Amendment. Judicial activism is bad because the Constitution constrains. The right and the libertarians agree here. Transgression is a clear, bright line. Gun laws cross that line, except it's not a clear, bright line, really, with arms, because we all agree that you shouldn't be able to own a nuclear weapon as a private citizen. I mean, I think we'd all agree, actually, it would be nice if nobody owned any nuclear weapons. So, guns exist, number 5, and to afford some the legitimacy to possess them to the exclusion of others is to create an aristocracy, basically. I agree with that, more or less. Okay, so who wins the argument here? Well, it's a mix of the right and the libertarians who win the arguments. The left is correct about a lot of things here. They say these things are all true. There is inherency. The problem does exist. Not a reason to act. They do work in other countries, gun laws, but it's a different situation here. The Second Amendment might be deprecated. It's still the Second Amendment, and the harms of judicial activism, of interpreting away its meaning, and thereby setting the precedent that that's okay, are much greater than the harms of enforcing it as written. It may not have to be incorporated, which means it's not necessarily the case that we'd have to interpret the Second Amendment as applying to the state governments as well, in which case states could have different gun laws. So there are arguments in favor of potentially allowing states to have certain more gun laws, but there's no way that you can justify the dissembling of the Second Amendment and the allowing of the federal government to take over concerns on this. All right, so who wins? I'm going to say the right on this one. The right actually wins the argument. The libertarians are too persnickety about the whole thing and too wanting to be precise where there's not that much precision, really. So, okay, the American right, if you're on the right, congratulations. That's 1-0. You're ahead right now. This is my honest, actual, unbiased assessment of the argumentation.